My daughter-in-law slapped me in the face and demanded my house keys. The slap came so fast, I didn't even have time to react. My face was burning, but the pain in my chest was much, much worse. My glasses went flying, shattering on the elegant ballroom floor as 140 guests watched in absolute silence. I was at my own son Michael's wedding when it all happened. Olivia, the bride, had just humiliated me in front of everyone because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed, her shrill voice cutting through the air. "A woman your age doesn't need that much space." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up the pieces of my glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves, but no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor mother-in-law who had just been publicly humiliated. My son, Michael, just stood there motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Olivia continued, smoothing her pristine wedding gown. "Michael and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were pure venom. "But for you to understand how things got to this absurd point, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Angela Washington, a 69-year-old widow, and until a few minutes ago, most people here knew me as a simple, middle-class lady living on a fixed income. The image I had carefully built for decades. What no one knew was that my life before my husband Samuel's death had been completely different. We made the decision to live modestly to hide our true fortune and protect our family. A decision that now I saw had been prophetic. As I walked towards the exit of the Grand Plaza Ballroom in Chicago, I heard the nasty comments. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," whispered Olivia's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," added one of Michael's cousins. Every word was like acid poured on open wounds. With trembling hands, I took my cell phone from my worn-out black purse, a purse I'd been using for 6 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I learned to value practicality over appearance. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. On the other end of the line, a professional voice answered. "Christopher, it's Angela. I need you to come to the Grand Plaza Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth." My voice was shaking, but it had a firmness I hadn't felt in a long time. "Are you sure, Mrs. Washington?" Christopher asked, concerned. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." I glanced one last time at the ballroom, where I saw Olivia laughing with her friends, probably telling them how she'd put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Michael was by her side, smiling weakly, without a shred of remorse. "Completely sure," I replied. 25 minutes, Christopher. No more." I hung up the phone and walked towards my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to let the mask fall. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Angela Washington. The mask I had worn for so many years was about to drop, and they had no idea the storm that was coming. As I waited in the dimly lit parking lot of the Grand Plaza, the memories of the last 2.5 years began to flood my mind like an avalanche. It all started when Michael showed up at my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from when he was a boy. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he had told me. And there she was, Olivia, with her perfectly styled hair, her designer clothes, and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked at my apartment, sizing up every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. "How cozy," she had murmured, as she looked at my second-hand furniture and my faded curtains. Her tone suggested the exact opposite. Michael, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in her voice. That first dinner was a silent disaster. Olivia barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked about her family, she gave vague answers, but not before asking me about my financial situation with a curiosity I found alarming. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Angela? It must be hard to get by on so little money," she had said with fake concern. What Olivia didn't know was that I had been observing her just as much as she had been observing me. In the following months, I began to notice patterns that put me on high alert. Every time they visited my apartment, she would make comments about how outdated everything was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always lingered on the details that really mattered: the prime location of the building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Michael was in the bathroom, I heard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yeah, Mom. His mom's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we have our own place. She's so naive she'll probably even thank us for helping her with the transition." Her words cut me like a knife, but I kept my composure when she returned to the living room, feigning innocence. From that moment on, every interaction with Olivia became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivations. It was like a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The pressure mounted after they announced their engagement. The visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Olivia had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Angela. I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible," she would say, spreading the materials on my coffee table as if it were a business negotiation. "You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days?" Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent and helpless. Michael, my own son, began to echo the same phrases like a trained parrot. Seeing him gradually transform into that woman's puppet was more painful than any direct insult. The son I had raised with so much love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. That was the moment the seed of doubt grew into a bitter certainty, and I knew I had to understand the depth of the hole my son had gotten himself into. That feeling of mistrust was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away, and I knew I needed concrete answers before it was too late. The decision to dig into their lives wasn't easy. It felt like a betrayal, spying on your own son. But a mother's instinct, that little voice deep down, was telling me something was terribly wrong. So, one afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate and finance. "Kayla, I need you to investigate something for me," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation." I didn't have to give her names. Kayla had known me for over 30 years. She knew about my double life, the fortune Samuel and I had built in silence. "Angela, honey, you know I can do that," she replied, her voice turning professional. "But are you sure? Sometimes the truth is uglier than we imagine." I was sure. I had to know. The days that followed were torture. Every call from Michael, every visit from Olivia was a test of my patience. I'd smile, listen to their absurd plans for my well-being, and inside, my heart would break a little more. I felt like an actress on a stage, playing the part of the naive mother while waiting for the script of my real life to be revealed. Finally, a week later, Kayla called me. "Angela, sit down. You're going to need to," she said, and I knew the news wasn't good. What I found out chilled me to the bone. Michael and Olivia were drowning in debt. The wedding of over $49,000, which they paraded like a trophy, was being entirely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting for $2,100 a month was 3 months behind on rent, one step away from an eviction notice. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments that ate up 60% of their combined income. The life they showed the world, the trips, the designer clothes, was a facade, a house of cards built on a mountain of suffocating debt. Together, they owed more than $119,000, not including the wedding loans. It all started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that united this couple. It was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of Chicago, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I raised with the values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited, instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Angela, you can't keep being so selfish," Olivia had said to me just 3 days before the ceremony. "Michael and I have sacrificed so much for this wedding. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer even wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand, disguised as a family favor. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I knew a confrontation was inevitable, but now I had the ammunition I needed. I knew the truth. And the truth, as my late Samuel used to say, can be painful, but it's the only thing that truly sets us free. What I didn't know was that the truth I had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The real betrayal was yet to come, and it would be far crueler than I could have ever imagined. The most painful memory, the one that really sealed the fate of my relationship with my son, happened just 2 weeks before the wedding. It was during what Olivia called an important family meeting. They arrived at my apartment, and my heart sank when I saw they weren't alone. Michael and Olivia were accompanied by her parents. It was a perfectly planned ambush. "Angela, we want to talk to you about your future," Olivia's mother began, a haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect. "We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life," Olivia's father continued, a burly man who surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary, but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days?" Their words were rehearsed, too perfect to be spontaneous. Michael remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the son I had raised die before my eyes. "Mom," he finally said, in a voice I no longer recognized. "They're right. Olivia and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you move to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age?" I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me. "And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me? You?" Olivia's mother exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. "Angela, we understand this can be difficult to accept, but you have to think about what's best for Michael and Olivia." "What's best for them?" I murmured, beginning to understand the true scale of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Olivia took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Angela, it's not just about the apartment. It's about your well-being. We've been doing research and found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." Her fake smile made me nauseous. "What I'm going through?" I asked, feigning confusion. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Olivia?" She looked at Michael for support before answering. "Well, loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Angela. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help." The audacity of this 29-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. The absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. "We've run the numbers," Olivia's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. "The cost of the residence would be approximately $20,600 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over to, well, help Michael and Olivia with their initial marriage expenses." There it was, the naked, raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. "And if I refuse?" I asked. although I already knew the answer. "Angela," Michael said, his voice sounding rehearsed. "We hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures, but if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions," the implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. The son I had raised was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I knew I needed more than just the financial information. I needed to know just how far my son was willing to go. And what I was about to find out was worse than any nightmare. That same night, with the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth, I called Christopher. My voice was choked up, but my determination was iron. "Christopher, Kayla's investigation was just the beginning. I need you to dig deeper. I need to know exactly what my son and his fiance's real financial situation is. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything. And one more thing. I need you to find out if they've been making any strange moves, anything that seems out of the ordinary." Christopher, with his usual calm, just said, "Consider it done, Mrs. Washington. I'll put my best private investigator on the case. We'll have answers in 48 hours. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I barely ate, barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, the coldness in Michael's eyes, the blatant greed in Olivia's family. How could I have been so blind? How did the sweet boy I raised turn into this stranger? Christopher's report arrived by email on a rainy Thursday morning. I opened the file with trembling hands, and what I read was devastating. The financial situation was just as Kayla had said, maybe even worse. Michael was making $44,000 a year as a sales manager, but had over $79,000 in credit card debt. Olivia worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $5,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $119,000, and their main credit card was maxed out. They were using cash advances to pay other debts. A deadly financial spiral. But the most painful part, the part that broke me inside, came next. For the past 6 months, Michael had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies, asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been researching legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. He wasn't just being manipulated. He was an active, willing participant in the conspiracy. I felt the air leave my lungs. The boy I read stories to before bed, the young man I taught to ride a bike, the man I thought I knew, was planning to destroy me financially. But the final blow, the information that turned my pain into a cold, calculated fury, came at the end of the report. According to the private investigator, Olivia had been bragging to her friends. She said she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable properties and no competitive heirs. To her, marrying Michael wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. A business deal. I was the asset to be liquidated. That revelation was the final straw. For weeks, I had considered just revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood. This wasn't about money or desperation. It was about pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding were torture. Every phone call from Michael was a new pressure. Every visit from Olivia included venomous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They started treating me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Michael made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Olivia just wants what's best for all of us." His words were the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. And now, sitting in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Christopher to arrive, I realized that everything had led to this inevitable moment. I had a plan. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice. It was about teaching them that some lines should never have been crossed. I looked at the clock on the car's dashboard. 10 minutes until Christopher arrived. And I knew that before he got there, I needed one last piece of the puzzle, the final proof. I picked up the phone and dialed my neighbor's number. "Charles, it's Angela. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice trembling but firm. Charles was my next-door neighbor, a 71-year-old man who had been like a brother to me since Samuel passed away. I knew I could trust him. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes, right now. It's urgent." While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Charles just a week earlier. He had witnessed from his balcony when Olivia arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Angela, that girl brought a man with a briefcase who was measuring your apartment from the outside," he had told me with obvious concern. "When they saw me, they left quickly. I don't like what's happening at all." Charles had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Michael's behavior. "Your son doesn't greet me like he used to," he had observed. "He used to stop and chat. Now he rushes in and out, as if he's ashamed of something." His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Charles for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Samuel and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow was actually a woman with the resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Charles appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Angela, what's going on? You look very upset," he said as he handed me the documents. I briefly explained what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Charles, in a few minutes, a man named Christopher will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Charles, after tonight, a lot of things are going to change. I want you to know you've always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears. "You're family to me too, Angela. Do what you have to do." As Charles returned to the building, I opened the folder. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $5,300,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated a monthly rent of $51,000. The third was the deed to a beach house. Samuel had been a genius at investments. Together, we decided to live modestly. "Visible wealth attracts problems," Samuel used to say. "Invisible wealth gives you power." I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. My apartment, the one Olivia so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything. For the last 3 years, since Michael started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent was money I transferred monthly to the landlord. Without him knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,600 that had kept Michael's sinking financial life afloat. The irony was devastating. While they were planning to strip me of my apartment, I had been secretly solving their problems for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom. The lights were still shining, the music was still playing, but in less than 5 minutes, Christopher would arrive. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. The headlights of a car approached, illuminating the night. It was Christopher, punctual as always. I got out of my car and walked towards him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Angela I had been, and closer to the woman I needed to become. "Mrs. Washington," Christopher said, a legal briefcase under his arm. "Are you absolutely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what is about to happen." I looked at the ballroom one last time. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Christopher. It's time for them to meet the real Angela Washington." He opened the folder and began to show me the documents he had prepared with his characteristic efficiency. They were suspension orders, cancellation notices. Each paper was a nail in the coffin of the life of lies my son and daughter-in-law had built. "Mrs. Washington, here is the order for the immediate suspension of all bank transfers you have been making in Michael Washington's name," Christopher said, pointing to the first paper with a pen. "Also, Here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this document tomorrow morning. I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread that I had carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now, I was cutting those threads, one by one. "And the payment for the ballroom?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Cancelled," Christopher confirmed. "The deposit you had guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to find an alternative form of payment." The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Michael and Olivia's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding that was taking place at that very moment, had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support, definitively. "Christopher, I want you to understand something," I said to him as I signed each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. "This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Washington," Christopher replied with genuine respect in his voice. "In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you are doing requires more courage than most people possess." His words gave me the final strength I needed. We walked together towards the ballroom entrance, and with each step I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being. The music stopped abruptly when we entered the ballroom. 140 pairs of eyes turned towards us. I could see the confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized Christopher immediately. His presence at social events usually meant that something important was about to happen. Olivia was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Angela?" she shouted from the center of the dance floor. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried that arrogance I had come to know so well, but I could detect a note of nervousness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Christopher said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Michael Washington and Mrs. Olivia Dawson." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Michael slowly approached, his face pale. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked me in a voice that no longer sounded as confident. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" "Michael," I said, my voice firmer than it had sounded in months. "This is Christopher Evans, my financial and legal advisor. He has come to deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Christopher opened his folder and took out the first document. "Mr. Michael Washington, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately canceled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Michael's face. "Financial guarantee?" he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he chose not to ask questions. Now the uncomfortable answers were arriving with the force of a hurricane, and he was right in the eye of it. The air in the ballroom grew heavy, thick with the building tension. The once festive guests were now spectators to a real-life drama, far more captivating than any rehearsed toast. Christopher, unflappable, continued his legal litany. "Furthermore," he said, his firm voice slicing through the silence, "the monthly transfers of $4,600 that your mother has been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Olivia let out a sharp cry that echoed through the hall. "That's impossible!" she exclaimed, rushing towards us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "Michael doesn't have a rich mother. Look at how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was plain to see, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with growing fascination. They were finally seeing the real Olivia, not the smiling bride, but the desperate, greedy woman I knew so well. "Finally," said Christopher, taking the last document from his folder, "the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words dropped like a bomb in the ballroom. I could see some guests nervously inching towards the exits, as if they feared being trapped on a sinking ship. The penny finally dropped for Michael. "You?" he murmured, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. "It was you all this time. You've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I saw the little boy he had once been, vulnerable and confused. "For 3 years, Michael," I confirmed, in a strangely calm voice. 3 years in which I thought I was helping you through a difficult time. 3 years in which I believed you would eventually get back on your feet and become the man I raised. 3 years in which I hoped you would remember the values I taught you. Olivia started pacing in circles, clutching her head in growing desperation. "This can't be happening. This can't be real," she shrieked as the guests watched her with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive an 11-year-old car. You can't have money." "Appearances can be deceiving, Olivia," I said finally, feeling decades of careful performance come to an end. "For years, I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. It's just that the problems came from where we least expected them." The music had stopped completely, and the only sound in the ballroom was the agitated breathing of the newlyweds and the growing murmurs of the guests. Some were already recording with their phones, instinctively knowing that this story would become an urban legend. "Mom," Michael said, his voice broken, "please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. It wasn't just money or financial support. He had lost his mother. "The only way to fix this, Michael," I replied, "was not to have broken it in the first place." The silence became deafening. Christopher then asked the question that would seal the fate of that night. "Mrs. Washington," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details?" The question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. The show was just getting started. I saw several guests inching closer, captivated by the unfolding drama. They wanted to know every sordid detail. "Please, Christopher," I replied, with a serenity I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Olivia tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Christopher held up a hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon. "Over the last 36 months, he began, consulting his documents, "Mrs. Angela Washington has transferred a total of $165,600 to cover the living expenses of her son, Michael Washington, and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Olivia's mother, who had remained seated at the head table, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. "Furthermore," Christopher continued, "Mrs. Washington personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $52,000. Money which, as I mentioned, is no longer available." Olivia finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail. "This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have that much money and live like a pauper." She turned to the guests, but found only fascinated faces. "My dear Olivia," I said, "you have just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by their appearances." Michael finally approached, hesitant. "Mom, please, you can't destroy my life like this." His voice broke, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain. "Destroy your life?" I repeated, feeling the anger boil up again. "I'm destroying your life? Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 140 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home?" The truth of my words resonated in the ballroom. But we didn't know, Michael stammered. You didn't know? I asked, my voice rising. You didn't know you planned a family ambush to pressure me into selling my house? You didn't know you brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge? You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent? With each question, Michael's posture shrank. Christopher seized the moment. Mr. Washington, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets previously designated to you have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse. The impact was a silent explosion. Olivia staggered backward. You can't do that, she shrieked. We're your family. Michael is your only son. A stupid fight? I repeated. Is that how you describe a conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her own wedding day? Olivia's father approached. Mrs. Washington, maybe we could discuss this in private. There is nothing to discuss in private, I replied. Everything I had to say has been said here, in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. Christopher closed his folder. Mrs. Washington, all documents have been delivered. The legal effects begin immediately. He turned to the couple. I suggest you contact your own advisors. Olivia finally collapsed, crying uncontrollably. Everything is ruined. No, I said, approaching her. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. And then, a voice I didn't expect to hear cut through the silence. Wait, Angela. It was Chloe, Michael's younger sister. She ran towards us with tears in her eyes. Aunt Angela, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know any of this, I swear. If I had known, I would have tried to stop them. Chloe had always been my favorite niece. I know, Chloe, I said softly. You've always been different. But why did you never tell us about the money? She asked. Why did you keep all this a secret? It was a question that deserved an honest answer. Because your Uncle Samuel and I learned a long time ago that money changes people, I explained, as some guests discreetly moved closer to listen. We've seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ended by loans. We decided to live simply to protect the relationships that really mattered. Chloe nodded slowly, beginning to understand. At that moment, Christopher approached and whispered in my ear, Mrs. Washington, the ballroom manager is coming. It seems he's already found out about the payment cancellation. Indeed, a burly man in a suit, Mr. Parker, was walking towards us with a very serious expression. Mrs. Washington, he said in a tense voice, I've just received a payment cancellation notice that is highly irregular. The contract for this celebration is guaranteed until tomorrow morning. Can you explain what's happening here? Mr. Parker, I replied. The financial guarantee I provided has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that came to light tonight. I gestured towards Michael and Olivia, who remained in the center of the ballroom like statues of despair. I see, said Parker, looking at the scene. And who will be responsible for the payment now? The total outstanding amount is $52,000. Michael finally reacted, approaching us. Mr. Parker, there must be some misunderstanding. My mom, she can't just cancel the payment like that. We're family. This can be resolved. Young man, said Parker with forced patience. The financial guarantee was provided by Mrs. Washington, personally and privately. She has the legal right to withdraw that guarantee at any time. I now need someone to provide an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will be forced to suspend the event. Olivia approached, stumbling. You can't do this, she yelled at Parker. It's our wedding day. You can't ruin our wedding day over money problems. Ma'am, replied Parker, I'm not ruining anything. I am simply following the contractual terms that you signed. If you cannot provide an alternative payment, I will have to ask all guests to leave. His ultimatum fell on the ballroom like a final sentence. The guests started to leave. Mom, Michael said, approaching me with tears in his eyes. Please, I know what we did was wrong. But there are 140 people here. You can't destroy all this over a fight. I'm not destroying anything, Michael, I replied. You destroyed this when you chose greed over love. What are we going to do? Olivia asked desperately. How are we going to explain this? How are we going to pay for all of this? You're going to do what all responsible people do, I replied. You're going to find ways to earn money honestly. You're going to learn to live within your means. Christopher approached. Mrs. Washington, the legal process is complete. There is nothing more we can do here. Chloe hugged me tightly. Aunt Angela, I want you to know that you will always have my respect and my love. And you will always have mine, Chloe, I replied. With a final word to the couple to clean up their own mess, I turned and left with Christopher, leaving behind a ballroom in chaos. 3 days later, my apartment was a haven of peace. Christopher arrived with news. Michael and Olivia had been evicted and were being sued by the ballroom. That afternoon, Chloe, Kayla, and Charles arrived with alarming news. Aunt Angela, Chloe said, I've been investigating. They're telling everyone you've gone senile, that the scene at the wedding was proof. They're building a case for a judge to declare that you can't handle your own affairs. The scale of their betrayal expanded. Now, they were trying to use my justified response to their cruelty as proof of mental incompetence. It was a wickedness that surpassed anything I could have imagined. And they had a name for it. Plan B. Turns out there are more people on your side than they think. He took out his cell phone and showed me a screen that left me stunned. Charles, what is this? I asked, looking at what appeared to be a social media video with millions of views. Angela, remember several guests were recording that night? Well, some of those videos have gone viral. People aren't seeing a senile old woman attacking an innocent couple. They're seeing a dignified woman, a proud black woman, revealing the truth about years of abuse and manipulation. Kayla leaned in to look. Angela, the comments are overwhelmingly in your favor. People are praising your courage, your dignity. You've become a symbol of resistance against the exploitation of seniors. At that moment, Christopher, who had returned for our scheduled meeting, entered the apartment. Mrs. Washington, I see you've already found out about some of the recent maneuvers. His expression was more serious than I had ever seen it. I have additional news. Michael filed a preliminary petition yesterday. He is requesting that a court evaluate your mental competency based on what he calls irrational behavior and erratic financial decisions. He has provided sworn statements from several witnesses who were present at the wedding. Sworn statements? I asked, feeling the anger replace the shock. What kind of statements? Statements describing your unjustified emotional outburst against a young innocent couple. Statements characterizing your financial decisions as vengeful and destructive, he replied. But this public response will be invaluable if the case goes to court, Christopher added, his professional smile returning. It's hard to argue that someone is mentally incompetent when millions of people are applauding the logic and justice of their actions. But there's something else you all need to know, I said, making a decision. If Michael and Olivia want to play this game, then they're going to find out exactly who they're messing with. I stood up and walked to my desk. For these 3 days, I've been in contact with several lawyers specializing in elder abuse. I've been documenting everything, the intimidating visits, the threats, the conspiracy, even the slap Olivia gave me. I took out photos of my swollen cheek, taken right after the wedding. If they want a war, they'll get a war. But it will be a war fought on my terms, with my resources, and with the truth on my side. Furthermore, I've decided to do something I should have done years ago. I'm going to tell my full story, publicly. 6 months later, I was sitting in the city's most important television studio, waiting for the interview to begin. The show, Stories of a Lifetime, had contacted me after the wedding videos, amassed more than 3 million views. My story had become a national symbol. The journalist, Jasmine Carter, a respected woman, reviewed her notes. Mrs. Washington, she said with a warm smile, I want you to know that you've inspired thousands of people. A lot had changed. The legal case Michael and Olivia tried to build against me collapsed spectacularly when Christopher presented the evidence of their conspiracy. Not only did they lose the case, but they were fined and ordered to pay my attorney fees, which totaled $46,000. The bankruptcy that followed was swift. Michael lost his job. Juliet couldn't get clients. They were living in a small apartment in the suburbs, struggling to pay their debts. We're on the air in 5 minutes, the director announced. By my side was Christopher. In the audience were Charles, Chloe, and Kayla. The most painful silence of these 6 months had been Michael's. No apology, no calls. It was as if he had decided it was easier to hate me than to face the reality of what he had done. Juliet, on the other hand, had tried to contact me several times. Her messages had evolved from legal threats to desperate pleas for financial help. The last one, received just 2 weeks earlier, said, "Angela, I know we made mistakes, but we're family. Michael is sick with stress, and I'm pregnant. Please, you can't let your grandchild grow up in poverty." The news of the pregnancy was like a dagger to my heart. I was going to be a grandmother, but my grandchild would grow up in a home filled with resentment towards me. However, I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. I couldn't save people who didn't want to be saved. Trying to do so only perpetuated their destructive behavior. "Mrs. Washington, we'll start in 30 seconds, Jasmine informed me. I took a deep breath and thought of all the people who had written to me. Seniors whose children had taken control of their finances. Parents emotionally blackmailed. Grandparents threatened with not seeing their grandchildren if they didn't provide financial support. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera came on. Good evening and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I'm Jasmine Carter, and tonight we have with us Angela Washington, a 69-year-old woman whose story has shocked the nation. Mrs. Washington, 6 months after the events, how does it feel to know that your story has inspired so many people? "I feel grateful," I replied, my voice steadying. "Grateful that something so painful has served to help other people. For months, I felt lonely and confused. Now I know that what I went through is more common than we'd like to admit." "Tell us about the years leading up to that night," she asked. "It started with small things," I explained. Comments about my age, suggestions that I couldn't take care of myself anymore, subtle pressures. Family abuse rarely begins with blows or shouting. It begins with the slow erosion of your self-confidence. Christopher added the legal context, explaining the classic pattern of psychological manipulation. "And the moment of revelation?" Jasmine asked. "The slap," I replied simply, "when Olivia slapped me in the middle of the ballroom. In that moment, I understood that it was no longer about protecting my family, but about protecting myself from being abused." The interview lasted 45 minutes. Near the end, Jasmine asked the toughest question. "Do you have a message for your son if he's watching?" I looked directly into the camera. "Michael, if you are listening, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to abuse you. The doors to my heart will always be open for you, but only if you can walk through them as the honorable man I tried to raise. Only if you can accept full responsibility for your actions." And then I addressed the broader audience. "For all the people who recognize their own story in mine, know that you have the right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age. You have the right to set boundaries and to seek help when those boundaries are violated." 2 years have passed since that night. I founded the Angela Washington Foundation for the Protection of Seniors, with Charles as vice president and Chloe as education director. My book, When Love Hurts, became a national bestseller, with all royalties going to the foundation. We've helped over 450 seniors regain control of their lives. Michael called me 3 times in these 2 years, always for financial help, never for an apology. In the last conversation, he said, "Mom, your pride is more important than your grandson." I replied, "Michael, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I'd ever hung up on my son. My grandson, Elijah, is 14 months old and doesn't know me. I've set up a trust for his education, which will be available when he turns 18. My health has improved dramatically. At 71, my life is richer, more meaningful, and more authentic. I've learned that the end of a toxic relationship isn't a loss, it's a liberation. Today, 2 years later, I live in peace. Michael is broke, living in another city. They lost everything they tried to steal from me and gained a debt that will haunt them for years. I learned that self-respect is priceless, and sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family of blood. And you? What would you do in my place? Do you think I did the right thing? Write in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please leave a like on the video so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. On the screen, you'll see other stories that I'm sure you'll like. Click to watch. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next story.